I'm having one of those days where I'm like, how do I start a video again? I don't know. So, hey everyone, hi. So what is today? Today is Friday Reads. Yay! I haven't done a Friday Reads in a minute. The last Friday Reads was my wrap up, and then, yeah, I kind of do them a bit intermittent because I don't finish a book every week. And yeah, and then or sometimes I finish one, and I don't always want to come on and just talk about one book. But I have 3 books to talk about, which is very exciting, and they're all interesting in their own right. So yeah, anyways, I should say that I'm trying to get in the habit of saying that if you are interested in vloggy type content where somebody talks cheerfully and happily, someone like me talks about cheerfully and happily about books and what they're reading, I would really encourage you to subscribe, because that's what I'm all about here on my channel. I tend to be in quite a good mood, and I'm really enjoying vlogging right now. So that's what's going on. But today we're talking about the books that I finished in the last couple of weeks. And it's gonna be kind of a chatty one because I have a lot to say. Okay, so the first book I finished was The Tempest by William Shakespeare. The Tempest is a play that William Shakespeare wrote. Let me get my notes up, y'all. I took notes. It was first performed in 1610 or maybe 1611, and it is by the bard, William Shakespeare. I was picking this up. I'll do my story time first, and then I'll get into the book, the actual book. So what happened is that I said I was going to read Hamlet for Shakespeare, and then what actually happened is that I picked up Hamlet, and I got this like dread feeling in the pit of my stomach. And I think it has all come from the fact that the last time I read Shakespeare was in college. I was an extremely young college student. I started college when I was a babe. And when I finally got to Shakespeare, I was still pretty young. And I took, I think, an Elizabethan class and then a Jacobean class. So it wasn't classes solely on Shakespeare, but mostly about the time period and the literature that came about in that time period. And Shakespeare was heavily influenced. And though I had a wonderful teacher in that class, she was more about teaching the content and she was not a cheerleader for Shakespeare himself or his works. It was more about the thinking behind Shakespeare rather than the bard and the writing. I remember some of the stuff she was really, really into, but she couldn't quite get me to love Shakespeare. So those were my 2 experiences in college. I did fine in those classes, as I did for many of my classes. And then I sort of moved on, and I was like, phew, Shakespeare is over. I do not need to think about him again. And I didn't for years and years and years. And then my husband got into reading some Shakespeare. He read some Hamlet and I think a couple of other plays. And I was like, great, I am not interested. Keep that Shakespeare man away from me. And then here I am on YouTube. I am doing my booktube thing, and Shakespeare comes up, and everybody is talking very excitedly and very enthusiastically about Shakespeare. And I was like, you know what? It is time for me to put aside my feelings about Shakespeare and to sort of dive in with gusto. And so I did, but I think some of those old lingering feelings of class assignments and having to read Shakespeare and the requirements to read Shakespeare from my younger self really didn't really came back with a force as I was trying to read Hamlet. So I was like, okay, I'm done. I don't want to read Hamlet. I'm going to try something else. And so I picked up The Tempest. And here we'll talk about The Tempest. So The Tempest, my little one is literally right here. Yeah. Okay, so The Tempest is about Prospero, who is on an island with Miranda, and Prospero is sort of a wizard, or I thought of him as like a puppet master. He causes a storm. Give me 1 second. So Prospero causes a storm to happen, and there is a shipwreck. That's actually the opening scene. There is a shipwreck, and Antonio, his brother who usurped him as king of Milan, and Alonso, the king of Naples, along with Ferdinand, Alonso's son, and other characters are crashed upon this island that Prospero and Miranda are living. And from there, Prospero's puppet master magic tricks really come out to play. He sort of separates people, and he has this spirit, Ariel, who he sends on these little missions to get information, to pull the strings, as it were, in the lives of these shipwrecked folk. And it is a bit magical. Actually, it's quite magical. The story of The Tempest has a lot of magic in it. It's a bit of a love story. It's sort of good-hearted, funny, and I really did enjoy it. The way that I was able to experience it was I listened to it, and I got this from Sandy from Miss Reads a Lot, and David Wiley, who helped me along on my Shakespeare journey, to sort of change my feelings about Shakespeare. And so Sandy also listened to the play while she had the book in front of her, and that was definitely how I experienced the play, because it was really nice to hear the dialogue and to hear actors speak the dialogue with a lot of gusto. And so that was really, really wonderful. And then after I listened and / read The Tempest, I watched half of, because our rental expired, I watched half of Romeo and Juliet, the Romeo and Juliet with Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes, and it was wonderful. And I have, in a way, I've changed my mind about Shakespeare. I don't think that he's necessarily boring or only for class assignments, though those feelings were just sort of buried from my younger self. I really think that they are supposed to be very lighthearted, sort of extremely dramatic in the most theatrical kind of way, and I could see that in Romeo and Juliet. It was just like over-the-top love story, over-the-top drama, over-the-top hatred for the two sides, I mean, and The Tempest was in many ways no different, because it was really all about the magic and the puppet mastery of Prospero, and this sort of unbelievable love story, and the songs in it. I mean, even the lines are extremely funny. So my mind is working towards a change on Shakespeare, and I definitely will pick up more Shakespeare in the future, probably next year for Shake-Tember. Or maybe I might just pick up Romeo and Juliet and finish listening to that, if ever given a chance. Okay, so with my notes, I will probably make time for Romeo and Juliet, So with my notes, I asked myself, what role would I like to play if I were cast in the role of Shakespeare, in The Tempest? What role would I go for? I would actually want to be Ariel, the spirit. I thought that Ariel had a really interesting role, because they cast Ariel as there was a male voice as Ariel in the production that I listened to, but Ariel could easily be a man or a woman. And I thought Ariel was really interesting because he was in a lot of scenes with a lot of different characters, and I also thought it would be really neat to see, if I ever saw The Tempest perform, to see two things, one of which was Ariel flying around. I would love to see how a theater company decided to handle that type of character and that movement, and I would love to see the shipwreck, because I think that's another really visually dramatic thing that would be really fascinating to see live. So what surprised me was the magical elements. I didn't realize sort of how magical Shakespeare was until I read The Tempest. And I would recommend The Tempest to new Shakespeare readers because The Tempest is easy to follow along. Again, magical. That's the word that's coming to it. And in that way, it's a lot of fun. It's also a comedy, so no, if it's a tragedy, everybody dies in the end. Comedies, not everybody dies in the end. Nobody dies in this. Not that that's really a spoiler or anything. And it's really just lighthearted, and I think it's a good play if you want to get into Shakespeare. So yeah. Okay, so my next book that I read was Pablo Neruda's 20 Love Poems and a Song of Despair. This was written in published in 1942, and it was translated, this was originally written in Spanish, and it was translated by M.S. Merwin. It's almost like Merlin, but when a little kid says it, and they can't say the L, and they say Merwin. That's what I thought of. So what did I like about it? I asked myself questions as I wrapped up this reading, because I finished this a week or so ago. So what did I like about this? I like the last two poems, the Song of Despair and then the one right before it, which also had a bit of melancholia in it. Tonight I Can Write. Those two I felt like had the most emotional depth to them. Whereas the 19 love poems that came before it were a lot more sensual and a celebration of the female body and the love that one has when they are young. And those were fine, but I felt like the more emotionally intense and the most emotionally deep poems were the last two. So that's what I liked about it. What I didn't like about it was that I really would have loved to hear the poems spoken in Spanish, and I was looking around for different copies, and I think there might have been one on Audible, but I didn't want to pay for it, and the reason why I wanted to listen to the original Spanish, one second. Okay, so the reason why I wanted to listen to the original Spanish was because I thought that a lot of times poets use words that sound really beautiful next to each other, just alliteration and assonance that only exists in the language. And I know that a poet like Pablo Neruda would have chosen words that sound quite beautiful near each other, playing off each other, just melodically in one's ear. And I think that that's something that could quite literally be lost in translation. And so I wished I could have heard it in the original Spanish, but alas, I could not. So if there are any Spanish speaking or Spanish fluent readers out there, one moment. If there are any Spanish speakers, those who are fluent in it, and if you are ever up for reading a poem in Spanish on Poetry Thursday, I would love to hear one of Pablo Neruda's 20 love songs, or the Song of Despair, love poems, or the Song of Despair in Spanish, and then also done in English translation. That would be fantastic. So putting a call out for that. Okay, my last book, which I finished very, very recently, was Jules Verne, Journey to the Center of the Earth, which was published in 1864 and translated by Frank Wynne. Journey to the Center of the Earth is the story of Professor Lindenbrock. Lindenbrock. I don't know why I faltered on that. Professor Lindenbrock and his nephew Axel, who find some secret and mysterious documents and are able to decode them and find out that there is possibly a magical world down, not magical, but there is another world down at the center of the earth. And so the book is really all about their journey to the center of the earth. I'm not really sure where I left off because we had a bit of an accident. So it's a few minutes later, but Professor Lindenbrock and Axel make their way with their associate Hans down to the center of the earth. And this is a true science fiction novel in the truest and most, in the truest sense of the word, and to the form of sci-fi. In that there is a lot of technical writing. And actually, I'll just start there. So the one thing I didn't care for, but I can see the importance of and why others would like it, is some of the technical writing in there. There are all these instruments to sort of measure the heat and the depth and the theories behind how the center of the earth, it doesn't heat up on the way down, but rather it sort of stays a neutral temperature. There was a lot of that in there, and in a way it made the book feel very real. Also, Jules Verne had the habit of writing in actual scientists of the time. And so in that way, feels very historical fiction now, because it's been some time since this book was written. And so there is this element of realism, these scientific instruments, these scientists that are constantly mentioned, these theories that are referenced that seem to be true. And if you read all of the footnotes that Penguin put into this book, you would probably get a whole new layer to the book. But I didn't do that. I just sort of read right through. I did stop and read some of the footnotes. Tiny cut, still working it out. My little one is literally like right here. Okay, so the footnotes weren't written in as like an affectation of the story. It wasn't just this element and layer to the story, but it's something that Penguin wrote in order for readers to better understand the novel nowadays, for more modern readers. So what I didn't care for was the heavy science writing. However, I'm not sad that it's there, because I can go back and add that layer in for myself if I ever do a second read of this. They're not technical difficulties. They're just BB difficulties. We're going to go to the park after this, so I'm sure he's getting antsy for that. So my favorite thing about this is Axel, which is the Professor Lindenbrock's son. Nephew. And the nephew is really funny because he is sort of the voice of reason. He's like, we're descending to the center of the earth and we could die. Have you ever thought of that, Uncle? Professor Lindenbrock is actually often referenced as the professor or uncle, and then Axel is often not, his name isn't mentioned a ton. It's more like nephew. He's constantly called nephew, and the story is from Axel's perspective, and so he's the voice of reason as they're descending on this journey that is quite dangerous. He's like, we could die, we could, die of thirst, we could starve to death, we could heat up in the middle, we could heat up and die. And so he's kind of like this voice of both anxiety and of the one that is definitely reasonable. Whereas like if the book was written in Professor Lindenbrock's voice, it would be like, onward, I am making a scientific discovery for which I would sacrifice my life to make. And so the perspective was great. The character of Axel was hilarious. He's like, my uncle is constantly bad-tempered and, doesn't respect me. And there's just, the dynamic is fantastic. The dynamic between the uncle and the nephew is fantastic and definitely a wonderful part of the read. The one thing that surprised me was there were definitely parts that got my heart racing because of its adventure. This is at the heart of it a wonderful adventure story, and there were definitely some parts where I was like, whoa, I did not expect that. And the sense of anxiety in a good way, that when you're on an adventure and it's very intense and it's suspenseful and you want to know what's going to happen next. So that was what surprised me, and it was a wonderful and delightful surprise. And then I would recommend this to anybody who is really interested in a thrilling adventure. It is written for probably ages 10 and up, 9 and up, if you are a pretty astute reader at 9 years old. And I think that kids and adults alike, will really love this. The two things that I wanted to mention were just two very minor one sentence blurbs that one of which was a racist thing. He says, this person looks like the white race, the best race, something of that nature. And I was kind of like, oh man, like that felt very stark to me, but I know that it is of the time, but I did want to mention that in this book. And then the other one was that of a bit of a feminist thing. So Axel is, at the very beginning of the story, is in love with Gradine, and he wants to marry her. I think it's Gerda, but there was not a great translation, so they used the German name. So he's in love with her, and I think he sort of says, like, well, why don't you come on the journey to us? And she's like, well, I am a woman. I can't. Like, and it's sort of referencing, like, the weaker sex. So there are those two lines, but if you can put those aside, and they're very, I want to say, minute in this throughout the story. It's not the tone of the story. It's just minute references to things that nowadays is not okay. And so I just wanted to mention that. But besides those two little lines, the book is fantastic. It ages well, and it is a thrilling adventure. One that I would definitely recommend to readers young and old. And actually, I do want to read more Jules Verne coming up. So that's it. That's my Friday reads. A little bit discombobulated, a little bit all over the place, but I hope you enjoyed. And let me know what you're reading. I hope you all are doing well. I hope you have a wonderful Friday and beginning of your weekend. And I will see you all in my next one. Bye, guys.